Hey, how's it going? Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I've just had some friends over and I feel charged, man. Like we've just been on lockdown, and it's just like seeing
Yeah,
people is a rare thing these days, except for on this, which
I
just
know. This is great,
Zoom's.
right? So,
I like Zoom one on one, but like
yeah,
when you start trying to do your social groups on Zoom, and you're like, dude, just kill me.
it's
I've
no
never
fun.
felt. You feel like I miss my friends so much. I give anything to see my friends, and then they'll text and be like, "Let's do a group Zoom," and you're like, "Kill me now." No, I don't want to. And it's like,
Yeah,
how can I have both those realities to be true at once?
yeah, yeah. That's awesome. Where are you located exactly?
Manchester in England.
You're in Manchester. Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, I knew you were in the UK. I just didn't know exactly where.
yeah. And where are you?
Um,
You're on West Coast, right?
yeah. So I'm San Diego. Just
Yeah,
just just north of San Diego.
perfect,
Kind of just before you get to Orange County. So
perfect. Before
yeah.
hell begins.
Yeah, we're in a good spot. We're about 10 minutes drive from the beach, and we're in this town called Vista, which like was not really a cool place to be when we
Okay,
moved here, but it sort of suddenly became cool.
you
Like
brought it
it
up,
like
man.
well, I can't take credit for it, but like there was this downtown area that used to be just like pretty rough and like there wasn't anything good there. And then since we bought a house here like 5 years ago, and since then like all these breweries and restaurants and like cool shops have come in there,
Nice,
and like all of a sudden we're like, oh, this is like
pretty
we're
cool place
kind
to
of in
live.
a hot spot now,
Yeah,
and we probably wouldn't try to afford a house here now. So I'm
yeah,
glad we
exactly.
got
You've
in.
you've done well
Yeah.
at it. Yeah, so that's the right way to do it, right?
Well, I mean, we stumbled into it. It
Yeah,
definitely was not like a strategic thing for us,
I love it.
but
That's
yeah.
cool. Oh man,
Are
California
you
is
are
one of my
you
favorite places. So yeah,
Oh, it's great,
big fan.
man. I've been to the UK. I've been to London, but it was like such a short trip that I
Right.
didn't feel like I got to really experience it. My wife lived in Plymouth for a while,
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
so she she after high school she wanted to experience some life outside the U.S. She was born and
Good
raised here in
idea.
California, so she went and worked as a barmaid at a bar in Plymouth for a while.
That'll do it.
So
That'll give you
yeah,
some
that
life
will do
outside the
it.
U.S.
It will. Yeah,
That's hilarious.
yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome, man. Really cool. It's great to meet you. I,
Yeah,
I'm
you
I'm
too,
really
man.
stoked.
Thanks for reaching out.
I have to say, we're just kind of rolling. I hope you don't mind this. When I said
I'm rolling. I'm rolling
conversational
too.
and chill,
I have a C200 just like right up here and I've got a boom mic here, and that is
you sound great.
um.
So yeah,
So that'll
but
I'll
that's
send
even
that to
just
you
on this.
after.
But
Yeah.
yeah, perfect. No, that's great. But I have to say, I had never even heard of you. Now I don't know if it's because of my bubble within Christianity. To be
Sure.
fair, the name of your band, was it your band? Did you have a band, or was it just
Yes.
your
Yes. It
name?
was
Like
a.
it
It
was an
was called
alternate
Hawk
kind of.
Nelson. That's
That's
the
right.
name of the band. And
That
for
rings a bell.
yeah.
But I was like, I don't know who this guy is, but it was a big deal, like for a lot of Christians. I assume that's you were on the scene, like people knew you, and for
I
you to
I guess to a
come
larger
out was a
degree
big
than
deal.
I thought.
Oh,
Yeah, I've spent the last few weeks trying to ascertain why it was so uh newsworthy, I guess.
right.
And I feel like it's a couple of things. I think first, like there is, at least in America, if you were in youth group between the years like 2004 to like 2010, if you're in youth group in anywhere in America during that time, being raised as a Christian, then you probably had heard our music
Right.
and knew our band. It was the sort of a cultural thing that just happened. We were right kind of music, right place, right time, and
Yeah.
a lot of things connected. But a lot of people I find, like my age, for instance, I'm 36. A lot of people I find, like maybe listened to our first couple of records when they were in high school, but haven't thought about us much
Haven't
since.
kept
And
up. Yeah.
yeah, and that's fine. I'm not the slightest bit offended by that.
Right. Well, I think all musicians to some degree have some awareness that there's definitely people that grab onto certain seasons of their work. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe some people like Coldplay or whatever, like maybe people stick
yeah,
around. But a lot of people, it's like, oh no, I like the earlier work or later work, or
yeah,
that was that
yeah.
season of my life. And probably even more so Christian. Maybe less. I don't know. I I'm not
Yeah,
I'm not a muser,
I don't
so I
know.
don't really get it.
I do
as
think
much,
it
but-
was like a very specific period of time, and so people older or younger might not have the same, like
Yeah.
familiarity. And then I also think it was a very American thing.
Right.
Like, I do feel like I do feel like we did travel outside the U.S. a good bit, but the sort of ubiquity of the name was really only
Within
in
that bubble of
Christian
the
circles
US.
in America. I feel like.
Yeah.
So,
Have you
yeah.
found that I'm diving into the deep end. We can
Go
tail it back
for
in a
it.
bit,
Yeah,
but,
that's fine.
But I'm just
No, that's fine.
fascinated. I've got so many things that have just popped into my head that I've been mulling over the last kind of couple of weeks since I did come across you.
Sure. Yeah.
It fascinates me because it was the same deal with like a whole bunch of different people have come out that are kind of like fairly well-known names throughout kind of different portions of Christianity. But some of them, they're like, oh, I haven't thought of you in like 20 years. So I was thinking of Josh Harris as a great example where I'm like,
Right.
Harris, yeah, I remember reading his book. I'm like, he's still alive? Like, of course he is, right? I mean, it's, I don't know what age
Haven't heard from that guy in a
like,
while.
wow, what's he been up to the last 20 years? Obviously something terrible and slipping down some terrible slippery slope. But you're like, oh yeah. But then what has amazed me is I'm like, a lot of people seem really upset about this guy that they probably forgot existed for the last 15 years, but now they're like beyond upset that he exists. And I'm like, that's an interesting position to take.
I think the reason for that is that, for all of us, did you grow up in church or did you grow up in a Christian home? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm a PK.
So you're a PK too. So am I. So we're in the same boat there. I think that for people that grew up the way that you and I did, there were these very specific cultural markers that happened along the way. And I think Josh Harris's I Kiss Dating Goodbye, that's like a very significant cultural marker because there was this whole purity culture at the time. And he wrote this seminal book that really caused a lot of people to be like, yes, that's the truth. Dating is bad. I'm only going to do courting. Which, like, to me, even at the time, I remember reading that and being like, he's just describing, like, better dating, Or, like, not even better, but, like, a specific kind of dating.
Yeah, a very, like,
but I feel like because there's these, like, that was, like, such a seminal moment for a lot of people, even if they sort of outgrew his specific way of looking at things, when he comes out and says, I no longer believe any of this stuff, people feel like a part of their heritage has been challenged.
Yeah.
And like a part of their upbringing. And it feels offensive to some people in a way because they feel like, well, that was part of the foundation of my journey. And someone that helped me build the foundation of my house is now like pulling that foundation out from me.
Yeah.
And I think that's why people sometimes have the reactions that they do.
Yeah. Do you think that's it? Because I mean, obviously for me, when I think of my journey in faith, it probably was around my teenage years, late teens, that I was really, that's the time of life where you start to realize I know everything. Like all the things I've been taught so far are wrong and I can figure it out and I have figured it out and I know everything. Yeah. In that season seems to be a lot of the people that were kind of tracking with you is probably these people in that stage of life, youth groups, maybe coming out into like maybe young adult, that kind of like age, finding you and going, this is amazing, these guys. And you have impacted. They associate your songs and hearing you speak in between songs at a concert or something, that was a pivotal, massive moment in their spirituality. And then for you to turn around and be like, it's like, whoa, what are you touching?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating dynamic though, like just watching that play out in different areas, because I have been fascinated to like, this is not a small movement. You're looking at thousands of people a day leaving the American church. And that's not to be conflated entirely with deconstruction and different things. I know a lot of people deconstruct and stay within churches and stuff, but it shouldn't be a surprise to people that this is happening. But what's fascinating is people do seem to latch on to like certain individuals. And maybe it's the type of bubbles we live in. But when you first posted your original post, like I said, I'd heard of you, but you hadn't stuck in my head. I hadn't grown up on your music or whatever, being in Scotland or whatever as a teenager. And I got dozens of people messaging me going, hey, what do you think about this? And I'm like, it amazes me people send me that stuff anyway. I'm like, who cares what I think? But I was like, oh, I'll go check it out.
You've made deconstruction like helping people through that process. You've made that like a thing that's a part of what you do, and
sure.
And so
it makes sense. It does make sense.
It doesn't surprise me that people value your thoughts on this stuff. Yeah.
It's just funny. Or even like, well, it's just some guy deconstructed. What do you think? What do you think I think? Like, I'm like, don't you know?
I mean, great. That's how I felt. I was like the first couple of days, there was some waves, in Christian music or whatever. And that didn't surprise me really. But about 4 or 5 days after I posted, Fox News ran an article about me, and from that point it just like it went all through the media, like CNN, New York Post, Huffington Post, USA Today. Like I've lost track now.
That's crazy.
And I remember for a couple of days feeling like, what did I just do? Like I felt like I had like I thought I was just tipping over a domino, and it turns out there was all these other dominoes that I had inadvertently knocked over. And so the scope of it got a lot bigger than I anticipated, for sure. Yeah.
How have you found that? Because in my experience, I mean, everyone and their mums kind of going through this process on some level, but it does feel that certain people within the Christian world that have maybe a slightly bigger profile or a bigger following or whatever, where it becomes a bigger deal. Sure. What's interesting to me is, just like in everyone else's journey, different people kind of quote unquote come out at different stages of the journey. Now,
that's true.
From me looking on from a distance and just reading some of your things that you've written so far and things like that, I'm like, oh, okay, Jon's been going through this process for a little while. He seems a bit matured in kind of some of his thinking, and it's not like yesterday he had I'm not sure I believe this and just came out, which we have seen in different groups and different people. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think just different people process differently. But do you think you were prepared for dealing with the ups and downs and the different responses that you got, or do you feel a bit like, whoa, this is way different than I thought, or bigger than I thought?
I felt pretty prepared. I definitely like the deconstruction process for me it continues to be a process, to be clear. Like I still am working through it, but it had been in process for long enough, and I had settled on a few core issues and sat on them for long enough that I was like, okay, this isn't just like a fleeting thing. Like I really don't think that I can say I believe some pretty core things about Christianity now. And I sat with that for long enough that I knew it wasn't just a phase. And that's when I felt like I needed to say something, because I felt like by saying nothing, like I've had some people say, well, you should just process this stuff privately. And you shouldn't post about it because you're going to draw other people away from Christianity. And to that, I say, well, like I did process it privately for a few years. And then it started to feel like by saying nothing, I was participating in a culture that said it's not okay to doubt. It's not okay to question. If you're starting to feel like your heart is taking you in another direction, you need to be quiet about it. You need to sit down and shut up. And I think that's a fundamentally harmful culture. And to be clear, I think there's a lot of awesome Christian pastors and leaders that would agree with me on that. That would say, yes, we don't want to lead a generation of Christians that are only there because they've been told they can't question it. I think most Christian leaders would agree with that. So I felt like this was me participating in, like, there's all kinds of people that have these questions and that are having these doubts and processing these things. And if I can find it in my power to do it a little more openly, then I think that can be helpful and constructive for people.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to do. And I knew I was ready when I had this feeling that I could walk through this process without anger. Because sometimes when you see people deconstruct their faith, there's an element of anger. I don't know if you ever felt that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I did at times, for sure. Like, there's so many reasons why you could find to be angry about it or bitter or resentful. But I felt like once I had worked through a lot of that stuff, I felt a little more ready to talk about it. And I think the place I'm coming from now is more like, look, like life is hard. People suffer. Everyone suffers. No one is exempt, right? Mm-hmm. And we're all trying to make sense of our suffering. We're trying to make sense of the good things in our life and the bad things in our life. And Christianity offers us an explanation for a lot of the questions that we have in life. Mm-hmm. And so when people struggle, it's not surprising to me that the idea of a loving Father, God, is appealing. And it might even be helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure it is for certain people at certain stages, possibly forever. I don't know, but
I've been contemplating that idea. Like, is it possible that there are things that aren't literally true, but can be helpful to believe? And I don't have an answer to that yet, but that's what I've been contemplating recently.
Yeah, that's good. We should definitely go into that at some point, because that'd be an interesting philosophical
The
exploration.
problem is that once you get unplugged from the matrix, it's very difficult to go back.
You can. I mean, I was cipher managed, right? Like, I mean, he had some sort of major issues, or he just wanted steak, right? But it's really, I mean, the amount of conversation, I daily have conversations with dozens of people that are going through this, and it's fascinating how many people say, I just wish I could go back. Like, they genuinely are like, I'm actually really not enjoying this. This is what people don't get. Like, so many different terms, right? Oh, they're just backsliding. Oh, they just want an easier life. Or they, like, do you think this is easier? Like, maybe for some, but like not for a lot of people.
My entire
choose to alienate their family, and their family, their communities, their work, their business. You know, like, so much. Like, this isn't a choice most people make intentionally. For
a lot of people, it's not a choice based on like, oh yeah, this is an easier path. Like, because sometimes when people say, oh, you must have sin in your life, you must really want to sin, and that's why you're justifying it. You know, and I'm just like, I don't think that's it. I'm genuinely trying to figure out what's true.
Yeah.
And I'm very comfortable engaging with anyone who is willing to recognize that, no matter what they believe. Like my dad. My dad is a pastor, very educated. He has a doctorate. You know, he's studied the Bible and God his entire life. And you know, when we have conversations, he knows I'm not just trying to be difficult for fun. You know. Yeah. He knows I'm searching for truth, and so we have a means by which we can have a conversation, you know.
Yeah.
But if there's random people on the internet just spouting, you know, like just unhelpful accusations, then like we just don't have that much to talk about, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and they're always going to be there, and they're going to be there for everyone, right? They will be in the side of every person, every ideology, every position. There'll be someone there going, okay, let's pick a fight, you know, or let's, you know, whatever. But so tell me, because I know I don't know much about you, but I'm assuming some of the people on the podcast don't know about you. I'm sure loads of people on the podcast know way more about you than I do. But how did you get from pastor's kid to whatever you are now? Spawn of Satan, backslidden heathen, you know, I don't know. Liberated, free. I don't know. Talk me through some of the journey.
Well, it's funny, like even just like hearing you say those labels, I don't know what to do with those anymore. Like people ask me, so do you consider yourself a Christian? And I'm like, part of me wants to say yes, because I come from that tradition and it's a part of me. But then part of me goes, well, like all the things that you're supposed to believe when you're a Christian, there's a lot of those that I struggle to believe. So anyway, that's another conversation. But yeah, the backstory is basically, you know, raised in a Christian home in Canada, you know, God save the Queen. And you know, a very charismatic background. So an emphasis on the Holy Spirit, on experiencing God, on prayer, and specifically intercessory prayer. So an emphasis on, you know, signs and wonders, healings, all that stuff that like plenty of Christians look at and go like, ooh, I don't know.
Right. You're already on the fringe here.
Right. Which, like, growing up, I didn't know that. Like, I
Right.
didn't know it was like edgy Christianity. But to some it was.
You
So
didn't
I
have
grew up
like
in that.
intercity like youth group gatherings where everyone was like, "Oh, it's the charismatics over there." You're like, "Why is no one talking to us?"
Well, we did have sort of, like, yeah, gatherings that involved lots of different churches, but like everyone, I mean, it was in Canada, man. Like everyone was
so polite, right?
so quiet about the differences. They'd be like, "Oh, don't talk about the fact that we believe something. Oh, that they don't speak in tongues over there." But like, we're not going to talk about that, But so I was raised in that environment, and my musical education was worship music in church. I'm really good at the G chord.
Yeah.
So
You got your 4 or 5 chords down, right?
yeah, got them down. So, but then around the age of 17, I started playing in like bands, and I had outside of church, and had a lot of fun doing that. And then around the age of 20, I joined this band, Hawk Nelson. It was already existed, but they were still just kind of getting started.
Right.
And I joined as the guitar player, and so for the first 8 years I was in the band, I was the guitar player. And then in 2012, our singer left, and we thought, well, that's it, that's that. But we had another friend of ours encourage me to step up from guitarist to singer, and so we tried that, and depending on who you ask, it worked. But we did another 8 years, and we did 3 more albums, and I was the main songwriter for that time, and so really guided the sort of the ship for those 8 years.
Sure.
And
were you still in the charismatic world behind the scenes? So off the road. Where were you at, or what were you doing then?
The whole time I was in the band, I found it very, very difficult to connect to a church. We toured on the weekends, so we were almost every weekend we were gone, and then the weekends that we were home were so rare that like going and finding a church felt like a chore. Like when you have a church and it's your home, going to church is not as much of a chore, or maybe it is for some people. But I remember, during periods of my life where I really felt like I had a church home, there were a lot of things about church I really appreciated. But in this season of Hawk Nelson, which was like 16 years, like my wife and I could never find a place that felt like home. And I'm sure lots of Christians would look at that and go, see, there's your problem. You were unchurched for 15 years.
Right.
And, maybe they're right. I don't know. But as I was, taking on the mantle of the main songwriter, we're in Christian music, we're writing songs, and we want to be successful. And in that space, being successful, I really do believe comes by serving the audience well. And the audience, what they're looking for is not like wishy-washy songs that might be about Jesus or might be about a girl. Like at that time in culture, like Christian music listeners wanted like solid songs about God and his love for us. And so, we started writing more stuff like that. And I was like, well, if I'm going to be writing stuff like this, I need to like really understand. And so I started reading way more. I started looking for inspiration in all these different books and like in, various places in the Bible. And the more I dug into things, the more I was sort of like, I don't know, there's some weird stuff here. And then there's some stuff that I have a hard time glossing over.
Right. You were like, how do I work in like genocide and infanticide into this song about love? Right.
Yeah, that's tough. It's
a tough verse, right?
Yeah. And I had all these questions that began to bubble up, and there's 2 tracks to my deconstruction. I think for a lot of people, this is true. Maybe it's true for you, but there's the like intellectual side, and then there's the experiential side. And so like, I was deconstructing my faith on both of those tracks simultaneously. So like I was, reading a lot of things that challenged my preconceived notions of what my beliefs were. But I was also experiencing things that challenged my beliefs too. And And we can get into any of those things that you want to. I'll let you sort of
Sure.
guide the conversation there here. So
That sounds good. Well, so when you talk about your experience, because I think I've had a lot of people talk on about the theological, and I think we all get bogged down on these topics of the intellectual stumbling
it's
blocks.
very easy to get stuck. Yeah.
And there's definitely common threads, right? So me joking about like, well, God's like murdering left, right, and center, and like commanding horrible things, and sanctioning rape, and those are really common threads that everyone at some point goes, what do we think about this?
Yeah, and slavery is fine all the way through the Bible too.
Totally chill.
Yeah.
Even right into the New Testament, it's like, we going to talk about this yet? Now we'll leave it for another 1,500 years. They'll get it eventually, right? We'll let them really ramp this up before we deal with it. So there's common themes there, and yet there are probably people's individual, everyone has like a kind of like speciality where they go, no, I really got bogged down on this topic. But you can usually point out
people have their favorite issues, for sure.
Yeah, of course. But what fascinates me is the experiential side. So like, let's go into that first. Like, what was it that you were experiencing that was going, this doesn't add up, or this doesn't seem to click for me?
There were a number of things. And of course, like when you start talking about the experiential side, it's very easy for people to respond with intellectual responses. Mm-hmm. And so I'm aware of a lot of those responses, but just know I find them mostly very dissatisfying. So there were a number of experiences that it was a progression for sure, but like one that sort of was a very early on one for me was in 2007, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that same-sex marriage was legal. Mm-hmm. And that was like a big win for the LGBTQ community.
Huge.
And I remember feeling like this feels like a good thing. Like I want to, like in my gut, like I want to celebrate this because it feels good. But there's no way I can say anything positive about this publicly without totally losing my career.
Yeah.
And I remember just noticing that disconnect and not being sure what to do with it. And same-sex marriage is not necessarily like the crux of my deconstruction, but it was a point that I noticed. But a really big one was when I did this documentary on this people group in Uganda. And I'm totally aware of the trope of like, a white dude goes to Africa and then comes back super disillusioned about what he saw. Like I'm aware that I'm playing into that trope for sure. But I did see things that changed my perspective. I saw suffering on a scale that I had never seen before. And I had a really hard time reconciling the idea of an all-powerful, all-loving God with the suffering that I saw. And, like I grew up in this charismatic environment where it was like, God is so loving and so attentive to us that he answers even our smallest prayers. Like I pulled into church this morning and I was late and I didn't think I'd find a parking spot. And I prayed, God, give me a parking spot. And there one was. And so like he answers those prayers, but like these people are suffering in ways that are unimaginable to me. And God's not answering those prayers. And that was really hard for me to deal with. And I know there are intellectual answers to,
there always
the
is,
problem
right?
of evil.
Always someone's got some way to rationalize it.
But I just remember being there, being like, okay, either there's a lot I don't understand about God, or is a simpler explanation that he's just not there. And that I feel like is what really kicked off like the biggest sort of season of deconstruction for me.
Sure. What was that like? Because I know for I'm not massively in touch with my emotions. Like something called alexithymia, so I don't know what emotions I'm having until after the fact. I have to like look back and go,
Really?
I was angry then, or I was upset or sad. Or so
That's really interesting.
in my deconstruction, it was very intellectual. I
Okay.
went through a lot of experiential stuff and a lot of emotional stuff, but I can only really kind of like recognize that on looking upon it rather than in the
Interesting.
moment. So for me, like, because I deal with people week in, week out, I'm working with hundreds of people and talking them through this process and helping them and guiding them. So I'm very aware of the process, and I'm very aware that for the vast majority of people, like, those moments are huge. But for
Yeah.
me, I didn't experience that as much. I'm always fascinated by people's like
So
stories.
that's interesting. So your deconstruction was more intellectual, and the experiential side sort of came in later for you?
It was experiential for me. So the thing is, I get sad, I get happy. I just don't know I'm those things until later. So
Whoa,
I
okay.
only upon looking back, or my wife will say to me, Phil, are you okay? You just feel a bit down. And I'm like, and I'll like kind of think about my day, and I'll be like, yeah, I've been really low all day. Gosh,
That's really
interesting.
interesting.
So
Yeah.
it was a very emotional process for me, the deconstruction, but I wasn't as in tune with it and aware of it. So it's only in kind of looking upon it and going, oh yeah, I guess I was really upset by that, or I guess I was a little scared by that, or whatever.
Hmm.
But I'm always fascinated by people's journeys, because to me, I guess I didn't have that awareness in the time of just how
Hmm.
X, Y, or Z that moment was. But it feels to me that what you're saying there, of like just even entertaining in your head, okay, one of the options here on the table, and it feels like a pretty solid option, is there's no God. What did that do to you emotionally? You know,
I
what
think
does that look like?
I love the way you described it as entertaining, because that's what it felt like. I remember coming back, processing a lot of that stuff, and then I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to let myself not believe in God for a week. And just, it's almost like just like try that idea on and see what
Sure.
it feels like as I go through my life.
Fingers crossed
Because
he doesn't come back this week, right?
right, right. So I remember like, and I remember like like for years, I remember saying like, I don't know how people get up in the morning if they don't believe in God. Like, I don't know how you get out of bed. Um, and then sure enough, I find myself in that exact position where I'm like, okay, for this week, I'm going to let myself not believe in God. And it did throw me into like a pretty deep depression.
Wow.
Because when you've based your whole life on a set of beliefs, and then you set them aside, there's a period of time where you have nothing. And if those beliefs were the things that gave your life meaning and purpose, then you've lost that too. And there's this sense of like meaninglessness and nihilism that can just rear its head very quickly. And it wasn't until I discovered existentialism that I was able to sort of like get my feet under me again. And for those listening, I'm sure a lot are familiar with existentialism, but it's the idea that life has no inherent meaning, but you have the ability to create meaning for yourself. So like Camus is someone that I like. Albert Camus was a writer that I really appreciated from that perspective. And I don't know if you're familiar. I think you're probably familiar with Peter Rollins, but
Yes. Yeah.
he talks about
fan.
Camus a good bit. So,
But this wasn't in the space of that week, right? It wasn't like on like by Wednesday you were reading Camus, right? Or
no,
it was
no.
kind of a longer process for you.
Yeah, I said, okay, for a week I'm not going to believe in God, but that kicked off this whole process.
Right.
But I remember at the end of the week, I'm like, it's almost like I jumped back to believing in God again because it was familiar. I remember even like having dinner with the guys in the band because they knew I was, was talking with them about this stuff. And like, we had dinner together, and I remember telling them like, don't worry guys, I believe in God again. And they were, like, I think relieved, I guess.
Sure.
But they were very patient with me too. But I felt like as time went on, I was like, okay, I'm clinging to this idea of God because I'm terrified to let it go, not because I really truly believe. And I'm really open to the idea that God may be real. I feel like I have to keep that on the table in order for me to be like honest with myself.
Sure.
But I find myself, I gradually found myself settling into this place where I'm like, okay, there's a lot about the Bible that doesn't make sense if you're interpreting it as the perfect word of God. You know, if you interpret it as people trying to understand their existence and trying to understand why life looks the way that it does, all of a sudden the Bible's a lot more interesting.
Yeah, way more.
You know, so I started to settle into some of those types of positions where I'm like appreciating some of the things about Christianity, but not feeling trapped by them anymore. And it wasn't until I kind of got to that place where I felt like I could talk about it without just losing my mind. You know?
Yeah. So give me a ballpark, like you're talking about this kind of season, what kind of year is this? So you took over as the lead singer in 2012, right?
I became the lead singer in 2012. Yeah. So I started sort of wondering about some of this stuff while we were working on our last record, which was 2017, 2018. Okay. And then I did that trip to Uganda at the beginning of 2019.
Right.
And that was where I was like,
right. That was a real catalyst for you.
Yeah, that was where, and so I should say the other thing that happened that was significant was I had told the guys in the band that I wanted to step back from the band and not tour so much. I've got 2 kids now. I didn't want to travel as much as we'd been traveling. I had been doing video production on the side, and that business was growing. And so I was like, I would love to do more of that and less of the band. And so we sort of set a date at like the beginning of 2019. That was when we were going to sort of like step away on a semi-permanent basis with like a sort of asterisk of like, who knows, right? But like,
that's basically at some point, right?
We were sort of unofficially like quitting.
Sure.
And so 2019, the beginning of that year was when I went to Uganda and had that experience. But the other thing that happened right then was that I no longer felt the pressure to be a Christian singer, which meant that like I wasn't under the pressure to be like a professional Christian anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
And so it opened up a space to go like, well, what do I believe? And I think there was a lot about that question that I had been scared to address.
Yeah.
For fear that I would lose my livelihood.
Yeah. And that's really like, that makes a lot of sense. Like a lot of people poo-poo like pastors and different people. And I'm like, I talk to these people behind the scenes, trust me, there's a lot of them going through this, and they literally straight out of college, not even sometimes even out of college, sometimes straight out of high school, they're like maybe the pastor's kid and they just get them to church. Welcome to nepotism, you know? But like, they're like, I have no qualifications aside from running a church. I have no experience aside from running a church. I have a mortgage and I've had a really good salary, you know, generally speaking. Who's going to pay me 60 grand with no experience and no qualifications in any other field other than pastoring now that I've gone through a complete deconstruction? And you go, dude, I don't know what to even like. Yeah,
I know.
I mean, what are you supposed to do? And so when you're left in that position where your professional income, your daily bread, your rent, your kids, you know, getting to eat every day is, I have to look like a Christian for people. Like that's hard place to be.
I feel so much empathy for pastors, for Christian, you know, celebrities, because they are in a position where they're like, they can't really question stuff.
No,
you know.
Well, they're the people with the answers on the whole. It's not even like, that's a terrifying thing when the person you go to for the answers is going, actually, I'm not sure. That's one thing that's scary. Just to have a leader saying, I'm not sure about that. Whole nother thing to go, I'm actually not sure about much these days. I'm questioning everything. Like, you're giving other people never mind your own existential crisis, right? You're giving other people
and I do notice too that like, this is just my gut feeling. So I'm sure plenty of people will argue with me anecdotally on this. But I do notice that when someone voices questions and doubts, I feel like someone who's very secure in their faith tends to respond to those questions and doubts with a lot of grace and a lot of kindness. And I've seen plenty of that. But I've also seen people that respond with absolute vitriol.
Yeah.
And anger and like, how dare you? And my suspicion is that those people are responding that way because something about the questions deeply terrifies them. And maybe they find the questions legitimate, or maybe they have their own questions and doubts. And their response, I suspect, has very little to do with me. You know, if I'm the questioner in this scenario, I think it has everything to do with them feeling threatened by these things because they're not secure in their belief system either. You know, and they're going, on some level, consciously or unconsciously, they're like, yeah, that question's kind of a big problem. But if I don't have an answer to it, it threatens my livelihood. It threatens my belief system. And so when people feel threatened, they lash out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Think that's something that happens a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you see it again and again, and you see it in big leaders as well, who should probably be the most secure, the most, well-known, they know everything, like they've studied this, they've got their doctorates and master's degrees, they've been teaching it for 20 years. But one other person that's a big enough deal that enough people might listen to this person, and I better get on Twitter and tweet farewell Rob Bell or whatever, it's like, you can go, that says a lot more about you than it says about Rob, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't really say much about Rob at all, but it says you're scared. You're really, really scared right now that you have to write someone off so your audience doesn't listen to him. And all it did was sell Rob more books.
I also think, sure. I think there's also like a false dichotomy going on there. Like, I think a lot of like believers that respond to someone who's deconstructing their faith, like, let's take Rob Bell for an example. Like, a lot of people have criticized Rob Bell and said like, hey, you're leading people away from God. And my response to that is like, I actually feel like Rob Bell, for me, has been someone who's allowed me to find new ways to think about God.
Yeah.
Instead of the alternative being nothing, right? Yeah. And so I would say to a lot of evangelical Christians, like, Rob Bell, from my perspective, is not leading people away from God. He's he's speaking to people who would otherwise not be willing to believe at all. Yeah. And he's going like, hey, there's more going on here. There's something about the human story that's connected to this sense of the infinite. And if you aren't willing to look at that, you're missing part of the beauty of life. And I appreciate that approach, absolutely. I go to Rob Bell when I'm in these, like when I read Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, even though I really love those guys, there's sometimes a bit of a coldness to pure reason and logic that doesn't feel like it explains life completely to me. And so I find that I'm like, there's something missing in that perspective. And people like Rob Bell and Peter Rollins and Bradley Jersak and guys like that are who I go to when I feel like I want to still believe in something. I just don't know what that is yet.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Huge.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, have you studied any kind of models of like psychological development, something like spiral dynamics or Maslow's?
Literally. Okay.
Okay.
I literally discovered spiral dynamics like a week ago.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
And my mind is blown. Just blown. Like, I explained it to my wife yesterday. And she was like, that sounds really complicated. And I was like, it is. But if you get your head around it, it explains so much.
Yeah. I mean, every model is flawed, but it's a pretty great model. I spent a couple of years studying it, and I put out a teaching series, and I was like, I'll just bash out a rough framework so people can see how it affects Christianity and faith and what
Yeah.
it might look like at different stages. And it ended up being like 17 hours. So
Of course, yeah, because
just
it's
like
complex.
endless. But at the same time, you could just roughly get a rough gist. But I think the reason I brought that up, and I just didn't want to bring, because a lot of people that listen to my podcast have heard me ramble on about this forever.
Okay, cool.
But I wanted to make sure that it might be an interesting way to frame it. But I think
so
people that are like so insistent, someone like Rob, you're leading people away, you're walking off the cliff or whatever. When you're at stage blue, traditional, whatever you call it, you're so black and white because you need safety, certainty, and security. And there's these black and white dualisms required for us to be safe and secure. We need to be on the in crowd, the safe crowd, the secure crowd, the right crowd, and everything else, regardless of nuance, is wrong. It's out.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, there is no other way to talk about God. There is no other way to engage with God. Our way is the way you engage with God. And it's only as you start to break out of that model and you start looking at your maybe more modern stage where you become more rational, you start to trust yourself and not just other people that claim to be authorities, or you look for authorities that actually have credentials, or know what they're talking about, and you start to go, oh yeah, interesting. And then you look to someone like Rob, who's going, oh, let's maybe more green, even maybe yellow in a lot of ways, looking at things much more openly, much less dualistically. But you can't have a conversation between those two groups in a sense. You can, or at least
there's always going to be a disconnect. Yeah.
And it's one thing for when people have developed enough to maybe to like later stages, yellow, integral stage, they can rationalize and see the stages people are at and come and meet them where they are. And if you've seen Rob do interviews, he does this really well, much to his pain and the limitations of what he's given. But when you see him sitting down in an interview and they've brought in someone that's very stage blue to have a conversation, Rob can handle that on some level, but he's also aware this is never going to go well for me. This is never going to lead, because the other person at stage, they can only talk about the Bible as an absolute word of God. They can only talk about these things as if there's a black and a white and an in and an out. And so Rob's immediately using language that just is a completely different language. And so I just think,
and it's
just
speaking to people who are ready to hear it, right? Like I remember I actually met Rob years ago at a show. There was this big Christian tour called Winter Jam that we were a part of, and we played a show in Michigan. Now this is back before Love Wins. It's back before the church basically disowned him.
Sure.
But I remember he was invited to come and speak at a little chapel, and I don't remember exactly how he said it, but he gave us this little message, and it basically, I don't remember what the message was either, but at the beginning, he like, instead of giving a sermon or a message, what he did is he got up and he said, there's this thing I've been thinking about, and honestly, it's kind of messing me up, and I want to tell you because I want it to mess you up too. And then he began to tell this biblical story, and I don't remember the story, and I don't remember the point either, but I remember walking away being like, I have never thought about the gospel that way. And I remember just being like, it was a moment where I was steeped in, if we're talking spiral dynamics, I was steeped in blue, and he was showing me something orange.
Yeah.
And maybe a little green, but mostly just orange. Because I think he got greener later. And
also remember, maybe as well, just a side point, but it goes right back to one of the things you said right at the beginning. I think Rob's a lot more aware of where his audience are and therefore what they need. So we were talking about, can you teach someone something unhelpful, but actually it's the most helpful thing they are ready for, and it is helpful for them. And so if he's going into somewhere that it's like, oh, this place is blue as hell. Like, I'm not going to go in there and start, teaching about, I don't know, put down your guns, stop voting leaning,
no,
I don't know, save the whales. He's going to go, okay, how do I just start tiptoeing into the next stage?
I felt like he came in and just went like, oh, so you guys think that your thought process is super ordered and that you have all the answers? How about this? Boop. And then he walked out. And I remember just being like, oh, there's more going on here. There's more to this
Wow.
story. But yeah,
That's cool.
I think that, dude, spiral dynamics is, I mean, I'm in the middle of it blowing my mind right now. So, I feel like I have more to learn about it, but it
That's
does
cool.
help explain a lot of the stuff that I've experienced and a lot that I've seen. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. What are you reading and watching and stuff to learn?
Well, right. I'm consistently in this place right now where I'm trying to simultaneously read very contrasting points of view.
Awesome.
Because I'm aware that if I just read certain things, I will be drawn in that direction. So right now I'm simultaneously reading Sam Harris. Uh, I'm reading a letter to a Christian nation, which
Okay.
is a short book. And I'm also reading Carl Sagan, and I'm also reading Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion, which is dense, a little
Yeah.
boring sometimes.
I don't
It's
find
very,
Dawkins to be a convincing atheist. There's a really
it's
convincing atheist argument for many people, but I don't find
yeah.
Dawkins to be the best at laying it
Well,
out.
I don't know if I've like got an opinion on his effectiveness as an atheist yet, but it's just not that exciting to read.
Mm,
Like some other thinkers, like when I read Sam Harris, I'm like, I feel like my mind is being expanded when I read
yeah.
Sam Harris.
Yeah.
When I read Dawkins, I feel like actually the
It's shutting
opposite is
down.
happening.
It's just
Yeah,
like, what's happening?
so I'm reading that, but then I'm also reading Ravi Zacharias.
Okay.
I'm reading this book called called True Spirituality by Francis Schaeffer. Um, and I do this a lot. Like I read like 6 or 7 books at the same
Yeah, yeah,
time.
yeah.
I'm
See
going
which kind of
back.
grabs you or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah,
just run with it a bit.
I'm going back to The Idolatry of God by Peter Rollins. I've read
Uh-huh.
that one before, but I'm sort of rereading it. What We Talk About When We Talk About God by Rob
Hmm.
Bell. I'm kind of skimming. I've read that before, but I'm skimming it again. Um, Believe it or not, I'm reading the Bible more recently.
Yeah.
Because I'm seeing it with fresh eyes, and
Mm.
so like looking at a lot of the Psalms, realizing that a lot of the questions I'm asking were asked by people in the Bible. God,
Yeah.
where are you? You know, reading Ecclesiastes is like that. You know, reading Job is hard, but sort of like challenging. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
I'm
cool.
kind of all over the place right now.
Yeah, it sounds it. It sounds it. But that's good.
Yeah.
I like that. I think there's an importance to kind of not just kind of narrowly kind of like funneling all of our growth into like one
Yeah.
kind of, which I think as a good evangelical growing up, I probably did that way too much. And then I started to get, I just got a bit bored if I'm not reading something that's
Hmm.
different and interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, absolutely. So who were some of your big kind of and this might play more into the kind of intellectual side than the
Yeah.
experiential side, but
Sure, that's
who
fine.
were some of the people that were starting to really shape your thinking as you were deconstructing it, or at least kind of soothe the itch or give you some answers that
Yeah.
you were like, at least along the journey, you were like, oh, actually, that does make me feel a bit more content, a bit happier. It gives me some sort of directionality. Or who
Well,
are your
I know
big
we've
guys?
already talked about Rob Bell. He was a big one for me. More on the like I sort of said before, like more on the side of like I needed new perspectives on God in order to be able to hold on to the idea of God at all, you
Mm,
know? And so with Rob, I feel like he does a good job of not always explicitly saying exactly what he thinks about, like he doesn't really address apologetics really.
yeah.
And I think that's very intentional. And sometimes with him, I'm sort of like, why don't you just like talk about it? Like, what do you think? But now I understand he's trying to leave room for different people to have different experiences, lead them in different directions. And
Yeah.
those directions could be different, but still healthy for people. So Rob Bell was definitely, one of those people that I read. Um, Bradley Jersak wrote this book called Her Gates Will Never Be Shut.
It's great. Really good book on
And
hell.
yeah, because I went through a phase where like heaven and hell was a very it was something I wanted to understand better. And that book helped me see that like there are actually three views to, you know, what hell might be, and there's sort of scriptural evidence for all three. And in that book, he sort of makes the conclusion that like if you want to believe anything specific about hell, you have to prioritize certain scripture over other scripture. There's no getting around that. And that's been a theme that I've seen with everything to do with God. It's like there's so many possible interpretations that like in order to believe anything in particular, you have to like prioritize certain ideas over other ideas. And that makes me go like, we all just come back to our experience, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like, what have I experienced in life, and what do I believe based on those experiences? And then we go and rationalize. Then we go and find scriptural, you know, support for what we emotionally and experientially believe.
Yeah. It's a fascinating dynamic when you look at, oh, there's three options here. And so on some level, I'm choosing which one makes the most sense to me, which verses I like, which makes me feel more comfortable. But asking the question, so why? If I had these three options laid out on the table, I being maybe Christianity as a whole through the ages, why have I, on the whole, through the movement of Protestantism at least, why did we settle on this one? What is our makeup? What is our thinking? What is our view of God and ourselves that went, that's the best one. Let's go for half what the vast majority of people burn forever in their own fat. That sounds great.
That's a really good question. Like, what draws us to the idea of eternal conscious torment?
Yeah.
And I mean, I have a guess. My guess is that people, they accept specific beliefs in God and heaven and hell because it provides an answer for a question that they have. So I can imagine, and you know, you feel free to push back on me or give me your thoughts on this, but I can imagine that, you know, for a large part of the Bible, it's written from the perspective of the underdog, right? Mm-hmm. The Hebrews were constantly being conquered, enslaved, experiencing oppression. The early Christian church experienced persecution and oppression according to the New Testament. Again, like you can get into the merit of the writings. That's a separate conversation. But the Bible is very often written from the perspective of the underdog. And so what is the underdog experiencing? The underdog is experiencing oppression, people treating them badly. And very often, like, you know, Chris Rock has this joke, you know, he says, you know, everyone always says, oh, bad people, you know, they're going to get theirs. And Chris Rock is like, no, they ain't. Nope. Sometimes they don't get theirs. And that's the story of the underdog. Like, I can imagine whole groups of people being oppressed and noticing that, like, their oppressors never experience consequences. They get away with it. And so I could understand why they would be drawn to this picture of, like, well, in eternity, those people are going to go to hell and burn forever.
Yeah. And we'll finally get our reward that we never got.
And we'll get our reward in heaven. And so that's an example of a dynamic where I can see why people chose to believe in that idea of heaven and hell, because it felt like justice in a time where they didn't feel like they were experiencing justice.
Yeah.
And I that makes sense to me, you know?
I mean, that's one of the main narratives throughout the Old Testament. You mentioned Job, but I mean, half the prophets are going, God, what the fuck? Like, we're being good and we're getting shit all over. And then you got all these terrible people and they're just like living it up in mansions and, like, you know, have their, you know, 100 concubines and all these cows and camels and all the things that everyone wants in life, cows and camels.
Yeah.
Like, it's terrible to me. Concubines as well. I'm like, no, too much. I'm good.
Right.
But, like, you know, it's like, what is this? You know, and what's interesting is they don't particularly have that kind of view of the afterlife for quite a long time. It takes a long time for them to rationalize the scale. That's just what's quite fascinating to me. I'm like, that's kind of fairly obvious, primitive answer. In my mind, I'm like, well, yeah, let's just create an afterlife. Bad people go there, they suffer, we go to a good place. That makes me feel better. Definitely eases us up. It's a great solution if you want to spread propaganda as a powerful bad person. I would definitely get that in the mix, because it allows people to be like, yeah, okay, well, they are bad and they're not getting what they deserve, but there's no point in rising up. We'll get ours eventually, and they'll get theirs eventually. I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic.
I hadn't thought about it in that light before. Yeah.
When you look at how terrible most of the leaders were throughout the history of Jewish culture, in the Bible's times, anyway. But yeah, it's really fascinating. It highlights. Did you ever watch Kevin Miller's Hellbound?
No, I didn't.
Dude, you should go check it out. It's a fantastic. It's a documentary. He talks to like a million different people. He talks. Brad Jerzak's featured heavily on it. Different people. Michael Hardin, loads of people. But he gets other people like Mike Bickle, Mark Driscoll. I mean, like, really, it's fantastic. Asking them all about hell. Hell, and what do you think? What are different views? What do you think about these different views and different things? But he really hammers home, like, I think, I don't know if that was his intention. I won't say it's his intention. I had him on the podcast. I probably should have asked about it. I was talking about, he's got a new documentary called JES USA. Talks about the conflation of Christianity and Americanity. What a really good documentary. It's amazing. Genius.
That's a brilliant title. Oh, that's poignant.
It's worth checking out as well. It's like $8 or something to buy right now on like Vimeo or whatever. But I was talking about that and violence and all sorts of different stuff and nationalism rather than hell, because that's quite an old documentary. But the thing that really sparked for me was just realizing how revolutionary restorative justice is still, even though it was a very clear theme running through some of the Bible and being explored philosophically at that time, especially by Christians, which you would argue is the underpinning of Christianity as a concept of restoration rather than punishment. But it's still revolutionary for us. Even today, like, that's the biggest kickback when you start talking about hell and dismantling it, is we go, but we need people to be punished. We need people to burn. Like, what about Hitler? What about that pedophile? What about that rapist? What about that murderer? We cannot fathom the concept of them being restored and healed and getting theirs being a good thing. And
even for believers, there's a verse that talks about, I can't remember the reference, but it's, in Christ, he will reconcile all things unto himself. That's a pretty clear statement.
Yeah. It feels very universal.
He's saying all things will be reconciled to him. And so all things, everyone, everything, that seems to be what it's indicating. And it is funny when you make biblical arguments, because I feel like it's a little unfair, because I don't look at the Bible as the literal word of God. So someone can't use it against me as an argument.
Right. But you'll still point at their thing.
But if they believe that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, then I can use it in an argument against them. So it's sort of unfair. I have a tool that they don't have in these conversations. but
that's a really funny concept.
That's the benefit, I guess, of taking the position that I've taken. So
yeah. So how have you found? Obviously, this is something that you've done quite publicly recently, has kind of come out and do this process. But presumably, you've been walking this out with people closer to you in your life. How was this for your wife? I'm assuming you're a good Christian boy and you got married and, so assuming she's got some sort of faith. How was it for your family? Your dad's it feels like, in my experience, it can be a very problematic,
it can be for sure
situation.
And there are elements of it that have been really challenging for my family. Luckily, my wife is in the exact same place that I am. Wow. She is also a pastor's kid, also raised in a charismatic environment, also is going through her own process of deconstruction. She tends to not read nonfiction as much as I do. So she's a little bit less on the intellectual side and a lot more on the experiential side. But she's right there, with me, and we talk about this stuff every day. So I'm really grateful that it hasn't put a strain on our marriage. If anything,
Yeah,
in some ways, it's been something we've walked through together, and it's made us stronger.
that's awesome.
Um, but like my parents and my brother and sister, her parents and her brothers and sister, they're all Christian.
Wow.
Um, Most of them very involved at their churches. So this has been hard for them. We've
Yeah.
had personal conversations with all of them, and we continue to do that. I think for the most part, they've been super loving and super kind and very like choosing to believe that God is going to reveal himself. And to that I say like, yeah,
Awesome.
like I'm not trying to be cheeky when I say I'm open to that. Like I'm if God is there, like I want to know about him, and I
Yeah.
want to, if he's a personal God, I want to know him. And I feel like it would reveal untoward motives if I wasn't open to it, right? Like I can't
Yeah,
say
absolutely.
I can't say that I'm genuinely seeking truth and also say, well, I wouldn't be open to the idea of a God.
Yeah.
But I'm also stubborn, and so I'm like, I I am open to the idea of God being there. I won't just manufacture that belief in my mind
Yeah.
for any reason. So
Yeah. It's tough, isn't it? I have a friend. So I grew up in a myriad of different types of Christianity, but I was in the charismatic world for quite a while. And I have a friend that went to ministry school with me in the charismatic world, and also stuff. And he came with me one time to church a few years later, and he's long kind of gone, not really gonna do that anymore, and it's not where I'm at. And I was probably in the same place, but I was still going along to church because I love the community there, and I really wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to make this place a better place. I wanted to have the relationships I had. But he was in there, and he was like, you could see him in the worship, and he was like, he's like, he closed his eyes and like he'd be like, he's like, and he turns to me, he's like, Phil, he's like that, I could turn this on. He's like, I could go back, I could switch it on.
wow.
He's like, but I just can't. I'm too integral to what I know that it would just be me wanting this nostalgic kick of going back to what made me feel good. They are good songs or whatever. Or, I've never been particularly into Christian music, so I don't know about good songs, but for him, he said they're good songs.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm just like, it's fascinating to me that pool is there. And I'm intrigued because you come from a charismatic background. In my work, we're doing research with people that are going through deconstruction. We're working really hard to try and create a more accurate narrative to change the kind of,
Sure.
The shit that
Yeah.
we're up with a lot of time, and be able to turn around and go, hey, actually, let's look at the data. Did you know 34% of people that deconstruct still go to church? Did you know that XYZ, still believe this or that? And so hopefully we're going to try and change some of that narrative.
That's really interesting.
One of the things that anecdotally I've noticed over the last kind of 8 years is that when we look at how people go through this process of deconstruction, a lot of people go through a stage of quite strong agnosticism, atheism, even complete nihilism, and just like, what is there? Is there anything? Like, just really crash,
Yeah.
And I don't actually see that as a crashing or a negative thing. I think it's a very healthy part of the progression. Not even believing that you'll go back into Christianity or anything. Just I believe it's moving forward in an intentional, authentic way. Seeking truth. Some people stay in those places, agnosticism, atheism. Some people become a bit more certain about certain beliefs about the divine and start rebuilding some form of Christianity or some form of faith or spirituality. Other people stay within atheism of some sort. But what's been fascinating to me, and this is what we're hoping to include in some of our studies as we start to look at people's backgrounds and how they navigate deconstruction based on that. Anecdotally, people that are from Pentecostal and charismatic experiences over the last 8 years, I've talked to thousands of people, tend to go through a stage of that stage of being very unsure of letting go of Christianity, but very rarely become atheist. Almost always hold on to some sort of agnosticism. And I wonder if a lot of it is because it's such an experiential movement.
I was just going to say that.
How have you navigated the fact? I'm assuming growing up in a charismatic church, you've seen things like healings and prophecies and God speaking and different people now look back on that and describe it differently, rationalize it differently. hold on to it differently. How have you kind of navigated having an exposure to a type of Christianity that has been very in your face, signs
Yeah.
and wonders? It's harder to go, it's easy when it's a very dry, liturgical, there wasn't anything particularly miraculous happening, and going, there's not much there. But it's a lot harder
Yeah.
in my mind to let go of a lot of
Yes.
those other things.
Well, for me, it's layered and complex. So I did come from a very charismatic background. I saw lots of things. In retrospect, I don't feel like I saw anything that can't be explained. I don't. I have heard stories of people like watching a healing in front of their eyes, like someone's leg grow or something like that. I've never seen anything like that personally. I've definitely like heard stories of people being positively affected in like emotional and sort of psychological ways, but that can be explained too.
Sure.
So I do, while I was in a very charismatic setting, I feel like I still had a tendency to look at things fairly rationally. But that's interesting about your point of people wanting to hold, like people from charismatic backgrounds wanting to hold on to some sort of something. And I identify
and it is
with
entirely
that.
anecdotal. Like we don't
Yeah.
have data on this yet.
No, but I identify with that. That rings true for me because I do. My thought on that is that if you're from a liturgical background, your faith is very rational, and then it's much easier to adopt a new purely rational point of view if your old one was purely rational too, right?
Sure.
And so like I feel like atheism, like real atheism is just a purely rational point of view, right? Or it seems to me to be that way. But if your faith is very tied up in experience, there's so much gray area there.
Sure.
That when you start to deconstruct it, instead of deconstructing a very coherent thing, you're deconstructing these layers of feelings and emotions and indoctrinations and what about this time and what about that thing that happened, and it's very messy. And I think sometimes in the middle of that whole mess of deconstructing this ball of yarn, people like myself, like I find myself going like, pure reason isn't enough for me. If you come from a more liturgical background, then pure reason might be like, okay, yeah, like I can just believe that there's no God now. I believed there was a God. Now I believe there's no God, and I can live with that. I think if your faith is much more experiential, then you get over to this non-believing side, and you still want to experience something. And I find that I do, like, and it's in quirky moments. Like I've always felt like it's been a very long time since I felt like I experienced God in church. Right. But in nature, I don't know. Like I hike Diamond Head in Hawaii, and I look out over like half of the island, and it's beautiful, and I go, wow, this is spectacular. Yeah. And like I feel something. And then I have, like, yesterday, out of nowhere, I had about an hour with my son. My daughter and my wife were both taking a nap, and my son was just in this really sweet mood. He's 3 years old. That doesn't happen all the time. And he's only now just starting to talk more, and so we're having these little conversations, and he wants to spend time with me. And it was just me and him, and it was this really special, unexpected moment. And in those moments, I find myself feeling like there's something here in this moment. I don't know what it is. I don't know what to call it. But it feels like there's something about this moment that goes deeper than just, one human being interacting with, an offspring. There's something here that feels deeper and more meaningful. And it almost feels like I'm just like sort of touching the edge of something ancient and deeper than me. And, you know, that could be any number of things. You could call that, you know, the sacred. You could call that the divine. You could call that, you know, I'm feeling a resonance with the idea of passing on my, you know, my genetics to someone else. Like,
yeah.
there's so many ways that you could look at that. And if you're a scientist, you could say that bond between, you know, a father and son is evolutionarily advantageous, right? You could explain it that way, that bond, it helps make survival more likely for my son. So that type of a bond is going to be encouraged by evolution as we go. So I think a rational person who just wants to behave, you know, and like look at life through reason could look at it that way, and that is fine. I find that incomplete, and I find that I want to believe there's something more going on there. And if that's as far as my belief in God is able to go right now, that's not nothing.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot. But to your point, maybe that's because of my more experiential background in Christianity. Maybe I wouldn't look at it that way if I was raised like Lutheran or something like that.
Who knows? You know, I don't know. I know that lots of people within mainline Christianity or different groupings of Christianity outside of charismatic and Pentecostal still do. You know, there's no doubt that within the human heartbeat, I mean, long before we had Christianity, we had people going, whoa, there's something going on here. You know, like, so, and that transcends all kind of boundaries, right? I mean, we have a part of our brain that has evolved to believe in God in a sense. I mean, that's kind of mind-blowing in a way. But, you know, you go to a tribal community in the Amazon, you go to India, you go to China, you go to Africa, you know, you go anywhere in the world and you're going to find people that are trying to create some sort of myth that gives meaning to
these stories that it seems that we create, right? That they do help us process life.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I was talking with my mom this morning, and my sister actually a number of years ago had cancer, and, you know, while she was pregnant. So she went through chemotherapy, radiation, all this stuff in her third trimester. It was this crazy time for my family. She survived, and she's been in remission for years now. Her baby survived, and she had a boy, and he's 8 now. And like, what a beautiful thing that was. In retrospect, it brought our family together in a really powerful way. And my mom was saying, like, I look at that as evidence that, like, God makes good things out of the suffering that happens in life. And I was like, awesome, that's great. I look at that and I wonder, like, if we're using these stories to bring meaning to our lives, and maybe that sense of meaning that we bring into our own lives by telling these stories, maybe that's useful, and maybe that's helpful. And, you know, from an evolutionary standpoint, maybe it actually helped us survive, you know? So
it's a
I'm
weird
processing
thing,
all
right?
that stuff. Yeah.
Really weird, because it is an element of, like, we are one of the few animals that seems to have some developed sense of ego, of consciousness. You could argue that different animals have different levels of maybe consciousness. That's an open debate, depending on what you qualify and stuff. But you know, for us to have an identity as a ball of cells walking around that honestly is largely controlled by gut bacteria. You know, it's like we're not even in charge. It's the bacteria in our body's gone, we found something that works, guys. Pull this string every now and again, it'll eat, you know? Like, if you do this, it'll fall in love and make more kids so our bacteria can live on, you know? Like, I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing when you start to look at the human body, you know? But like, you look at that and you go, yeah, some narrative would really help there. Like, giving this a story, like, people don't want to do so. You go ask someone to do something, what's their first question? Why?
Why?
Go get me this, or go do that. Why? right? I mean, that's baked in from like, you got a 3-year-old,
Yeah.
right? So this is baked in from early age. You're fed
Yeah.
up with the question why by this point, probably. But
Well, actually, my son hasn't gotten to why yet. He's mostly
he's
stuck
not.
on no.
Okay, yeah. He's still developing his ego, right? So he's still
Yeah,
realizing,
he's like,
wait, I
no.
don't have to do this. He's at stage red, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yes,
He's gone.
He's at
wait,
red for sure.
I don't have to be in this harmonious, purple stage where I just do whatever I'm told and it's great for the common good. I could say, screw you. I'm going to do what I want, right? And eventually he'll figure out.
He says that regularly, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you, Dad? But yeah, so I think it's a common thing for us to go, well, what's the narrative here? What's the meaning? Give me a good reason. And we won't do that thing. If your why is kind of crappy, I'm not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
You need to give me a good why. If I'm going to go fight your war, if I'm going to go, whatever, you better give me a really good reason for why I should do that, because I don't want to overly. And so the way we create narratives funneling us into different decisions, and then it gets insidious, right? Because then it is a thing of like, well, actually, who's creating whys? Who's creating the narratives? As a culture, do we create narratives that are beneficial for some and not others, or beneficial for the whole? But as individuals, we suffer. When we live in a harmonious society, often everyone has to like take a step back and just be a part of the harmonious society. But is that good for individuals? And should we value individuals? It's just everything starts popping.
Yes, it does.
But it's fascinating to look at these things and go, oh, you can look at them from pretty much when you've grown up in Christianity. There's only one answer to this. There's only one way to explain it, and you're not allowed to explore like just talking about evolution, right? I mean, this isn't going to happen on most Christian podcasts,
right?
Whereas that's par for course to look at that.
It is interesting, like once you sort of step back to go like, wow, there's like if you're dedicated to the idea of like a literal interpretation of the Bible, as most mainstream Christians are, man, you have to ignore a lot of stuff. Like a lot of like you basically have to go to war with science, because like, and I've heard people say, oh, science and Christianity can live together, and I'm like, they can if you're willing to get rid of a lot of the things that Christians believe. Then they can live together then. Yeah. It's like my process hasn't been so much, deconstructing one image of God into another. It's more just been like asking like, hey, is faith sort of something that we created in order to explain the things we saw around us using the information we had at the time, and has it been useful? And I think that it largely has been. I mean, certainly it's created a lot of problems too. Like you look at the Crusades or the Inquisition, or people being burned at the stake for being witches. Like obviously Christianity has been used in some horrible ways, but it's also been really useful in a lot of ways. And when you think about loving people if you think about sacrificing for people and making your life about others, Jesus in a lot of ways was a very good example of that. And so I have a hard time throwing the entire baby and bathwater out. So I sort of find myself trying to sift through the bits of it,
Yeah. Have you explored myths outside of the Jewish Christian tradition? Has that been something that you've been interested in, or not in particular?
Yeah, I read. I should tell you, I probably only have a couple of minutes left.
Oh yeah, cool. We can wrap up for sure.
I figured we'd talk for maybe an hour and a half, and I have a thing at 10. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. We can wrap up for sure.
But I'll still answer that question. I just wanted to.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'll cut that out, but
no, it's good. We can roll. I'm pretty sure.
Other beliefs. I did go through a season where I was studying a lot of other religions, because I was like, okay, well, what about all these? Like, these people believe this stuff as much as everyone I know believes Christianity. I was really stunned to find the roots of Islam being so so tied to Judaism and Christianity. That was super fascinating to me. I looked into the Vedic texts from the Hindu faith. That was super interesting. Buddhism probably jumped out at me the most as being the most useful. Like, because it's not strictly speaking a religion. It's more of a philosophy of life. And I think no matter whether you're Christian or not, I think there's a ton about Buddhism that is useful in just sort of training your mind. And so, you know, I had a family member make a comment during this whole deconstruction, you know, she was like, well, as long as you're not a Buddhist. And what she didn't know is at the moment I was like reading all kinds of stuff about Buddhism, and I was like, oh, okay.
That's funny. It's funny how people pick their one thing. It's like, that's the worst it could be.
Well, it just tends to be whatever they fear the most, right? And and you tend to fear whatever you know the least about.
Yeah.
So
no, that makes a lot of sense, dude. Thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed it. I feel we should do this again and have another. We branch out outside of just your personal journey and into like, I love the way you think. I love reading your stuff. So I'd love to explore like some ideas and stuff. It'd be cool.
Well, let's do this again.
How can people connect with you if they want to follow you?
Yeah.
With you, whatever.
It tends to be Instagram. Instagram tends to be the place where I'm interacting with the most people. So it's just Jon Steingard on Instagram, just JonSteingard.
Cool. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. Cool. Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks
are you working on any projects? Are you going to write about any of your journey, or are you
I'm
working on some music stuff, or
not music so much? I'm still doing film work. Like I'm doing some music related stuff, some corporate stuff, but I am sort of tinkering with the idea of writing a book because I love writing. And I'm just trying to figure out what form that should be in. And also, you know, trying to make sure I'm not doing it in a reactionary way. Trying to make sure that like I feel like I really know what I want to say before I take on something like that. That's one of the reasons I'm writing on Instagram is I'm working out the writing muscle.
Processing it out. It's good. Your stuff is good. It speaks to me at least anyway. So you have at least one reader.
Thank you.
Dude, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
We'll stay in touch as well for sure.
Thank you.
All right. Love you, man.
All right.
Catch you later.
Take care.